school starts. Typically, Washington, their colleges start like the third week in September, but football usually starts in August. We played our first game, I think, in August. We played and we beat the University of Colorado, and they were one of the tougher opponents. Well, the game's over, now we're back in the dressing room, and they're just congratulating the hell out of each other. And I'm playing between the center and the tackle. They never said a damn word to me. I knew something was wrong ahead of time. Now what happened was they were all Mormons, and most of them were garment Mormons. Do you know what they are?
Yeah.
Okay. They see when they shower. That's how I knew they were. When they shower, they don't take that thing all off. You know, they got that T-shirt. They take it off just one sleeve at a time. They wash this side, put the clean one on, take this side, put the clean. That's where they shower. And when you're the non-Mormon, I'm telling you, you're ostracized. So I told the coach that they didn't gonna have this. He was a good guy, and he said, "I see what's happening, and you're not included. We're shunning you." So I said, "Well, I guess I might as well go into service." So I grabbed my suitcase and started hitchhiking back to Idaho, which is probably 700 miles or so away from there. And on the way, I stopped. You know, I told you 6 of us got kicked out of our scholarships at the university. One of them lived in Boise. So I stopped to see him. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm working at this concrete plant, and I hate it." I said, "Well, we know we're both going to get drafted, so let's go over to Seattle and join whatever we wanted, because that's a big, you know, they had a big city, you could have a lot of choices of which service." On the way, 2 or 3 more of those guys had been kicked out, had started Central Washington University, which is at Ellensburg, which is right in the middle of the state. It's a school of about 10,000, and they play the second level teams. You know, they don't play. They play like like Central Florida would have been one, because now they've moved up to the big time. And they have a national championship, by the way, that level. Let's see, it's level 2, I think they call it, or double A.
Division, yeah.
That's what it is, Division double A. So anyhow, I stopped there, and they said, "Well, why the hell did you go to school here? School hadn't started yet. We're turning out for football." And I did know the coach there, because he had been one of my high school coaches. So he said, "Yeah, I'll fix you up, get a job, pay your tuition and stuff." Didn't quite work out as good as I thought. But anyhow, so now it ends up there's actually 6 of us from a big college. We're playing at this little college. 6, we'd all got our scholarships taken away. And so we ate that conference. We won the conference, of course. And that's the first time they'd ever been big in football. And we beat the year champion before, like 45-0. And it was a funny thing. Here we are, everybody's from somewhere else, you know. In those small colleges, usually they're a group of guys that kind of go to high school and move there, and they know each other. We didn't know anybody. So we all stuck together pretty close, the 6 of us that came in. But we did. We did well. And eventually I got voted into the Hall of Fame, you know, because of that.
And then you also played football in the Navy.
Yeah, and also at the University of Washington. See, the Marines sent me to the University of Washington. Here I am eligible again. Because of wartime, they took that off. There were a whole bunch of us that had been college football players from some other place. See, the Marines sent us about 280 of us there to take physics and math, stuff I hated, but we had to take. And we were, and we won. Of course, we won the conference and went to Rose Bowl. But and then, of course, when I got commissioned, they ended up sending me to that training, that underwater training at Fort Pierce, Florida. They had all these big-time football players. I remember when they sent me there, the guy that this commander interviewed me and told me about it. I said, "Well, I wouldn't like it. I don't like this." And he said, "Yeah, but you'll like it." He named off these football players who I didn't know but knew of. They were big-time football players, you know. And So, and they weren't. Got in that, I got there in time for the football season. This was after I was commissioned, of course. And most of the players were officers, but not all of them. Some of the better ones were enlisted. And we played schools mostly in the South, and Texas, and Alabama, I mean, through there. And then we played the 3rd Air Force for the service championship, and we didn't beat them easy. They had the same thing that gathered these football. But when we played the Chicago Bears, beat them 72-0. That would give you an idea. Of course, again, fair is fair. They had a lot of 4Fers on there that weren't there. That's why they were there. Otherwise, they'd have been called up in the military, mostly.
Did you tell them about me playing the Rose Bowl?
Yeah.
It's not on here though. What school did you play?
Washington. Well, what did we play?
In the Rose Bowl.
USC.
But it was when you were playing for Washington.
Yeah.
And then you played for Miami, but it wasn't
for the Seahawks, they were called. Miami Seahawks. Funny, the Seattle became the Seahawks. Of course, that was much later. And we played our games in the Rose Bowl. I mean, in the Orange Bowl. That's what the big stadium is there. But we didn't draw crap. We didn't have a very good team. We beat Texas, the Dallas Texans or something, and I can't remember beating anybody else. The good team was Cleveland Browns. They had the blacks. The only team that had any blacks. And they were bigger and we were faster. It's funny that the owners then got the message. You better do something. Cleveland Browns won the conference 4 years in a row. I think they were undefeated. They had some good blacks. Jesus, they were good. Big and fast. I remember they had a guy named Marion Motley who was a fullback. He weighed 260. Crazy, he could run like it. We had, by the way, the world's champion 100-yard dasher, though, in Miami. His name was Clyde Jeffries. He was tied with Jesse Owens for the world's record. But he didn't have any guts. He could run like hell. If he ever got ahead of you, you were gone.
Oh, tell the part about the lab that you designed, too, for Bill Gates.
Well, after I'd been coaching, teaching, in Washington, in those days, you had to be a full-time teacher. They had to change it because they couldn't get enough coaches. So, and first year I taught math, which I despised, and could keep ahead of the students a little bit. Second year they switched me to history, and so I taught history full schedule and coached football and boxing. Then I named a track coach too, and I traded with I was named a baseball coach, and I hated baseball, so I traded with the baseball coach and with the track coach. And he hadn't done a thing in track. He didn't like track, and I went to the state meet. In boxing, by the way, we won the state boxing championship 2 or 3 years in a row. Mostly because I would talk to football players, and the high schools always have trouble with heavyweights and wrestling and boxing, and I'd have 3 or 4 guys that were big enough for heavyweights, meaner than crap. And so I can remember one who had a big Indian. He was about 240, and he was scared to death. But he looked like, and the opponent would look and go down at the first blow. He thought, this guy going to kill me.
I'd rather go down than really be hit.
He was undefeated. I always thought that was so funny. We only fought. We fought a Catholic school, and they had a black. And I think my kid beat him, but he was scared to death of him, I remember. White kids are scared to death when you're not around them. See, they never saw a black kid. We didn't have any in high school.
How long did you teach?
13 years.
Oh, that's right.
Well, then I was named. I was also had a building. I was doing construction. I usually hired 3 or 4. We built about 2 to 3 houses a year. Anyhow, so then the district, they were looking for an administrator to run we're building 4 schools a year. Man, I was going to, we had 5 high schools and a whole bunch of, so they were looking for somebody that was familiar with education and also with construction, so they offered me the job. And and then several things happened. Once they passed a law in Washington that if you use taxpayers' money for public construction, you had to have an expert represent you and look after the taxpayers' interest. In other words, represent the school board. They would hire me. So I went into consulting. I had a partner in the beginning. He had gone to Stanford, and they had a it was a master's program on school construction. That's what they got you. And so we were partners until I got divorced, and then the judge made us break up the partnership, which was lucky for me because I fired the bastard. No, he was a good enough guy, but I couldn't depend on him. Anyhow, so then we started working for anybody who would hire us. Usually we worked in Alaska, and we worked in Washington to be held. We did one school in California. And then after I became the sole owner of the company, I had consultants that I hired too. See, sometimes they would want a doctorate degree. You know how that is. I was about to lose the job, and there was my only competitor in the Northwest was a combine of about a dozen PhDs. And I had the job, except their guru, this was an Indian tribe, said, well, we better have these other guys with a doctorate degree because it would look bad having a guy who didn't have a doctorate degree ahead of our educational planning. But fortunately for me, an old Indian on there said, look, I listened to Stuart Smith, and he's the guy I want. So I got hired. Well, what happened was that the doctors did such a poor job of interviewing. It's partly because they never understood the sweat and dirt, of construction. And they were lost. The Indians didn't know any lofty shit. They wanted a good school. And so that really helped. They had hired an architect before I got there, maybe 2 years, to build them a new middle school. They didn't know the rules. They thought you hired an architect and then he made the plans and you paid him and the contractor built a school. And so he showed up with a set of plans and bidding document and their tilt-up concrete walls. Well, the Indians, they pictured a huge Indian longhouse, in the Northwest motive. So what did they do? They just said, well, they paid him off, so we decided not to pay that son of a bitch all about $100,000. And so I knew that, because a friend of mine in the State Department had told me. So when I talked to him, I said, I'll tell you, if I had been your consultant then, you wouldn't have paid that guy a nickel. Because my contracts that I wrote up for him always got me in trouble with the attorney. But you can beat that too. Anyhow, I would say, well, the architect isn't allowed to do anything where he's going to expect to be charged for it, like drawing pretty much permanent lines until you have approved of them. And you had 5 times before you got a cent, see. And see, they had a chance if they'd only realized it to look at those concrete plans being drawn and say, no. So I built them it looked like a huge long house. The gym was about 40 feet high, and they were just crazy about it.
How did you get in contact with the job for Bill Gates? How did that come about?
Well, by then I was getting pretty experienced, and on the board, those private schools, they don't have a school board, they have something else, like regents, like what the university call them. And the regents in a school, this was a non-denominational school. It was easily the best school in the Northwest. And one of them, there was a major contractor on it. And he said, on the board, well, who are we getting to look out after the school's interest? Who do we have that's going to be there and say they're getting what they paid for? You better get somebody. So then they had this committee to get somebody, and they didn't know how to go about. How do you know? They were most people when they're doing heavy building have the pain. They mostly get screwed all the time because they hire architect. They depend on the architect to protect them. He's busy protecting himself. He's not necessarily doing what will work. And so they had this committee, and they were again people who own Seattle. But one of them, the chairman of the committee, was my advisor in graduate school. How do you like that? It's like meeting your brother. It's at the right place. And it'd been, of course, a few years, and so I'm in there for the interview, and there's 4 or 5 of these regents there, and he introduced me, and then he said, God, don't I know you? I said, yes, you're my graduate school advisor. He said, oh, Stuart Smith. He turned around to this group of the people who own Seattle and said, I recommend we don't go any further. We hire Stuart Smith. That was it. answer your question, that's how.
Uh-huh.
So I get on the
Yeah.
job, and as headmaster of the high school, you know, I got these 3 kids. They were probably juniors. He said they're the most knowledgeable people about computers. There's nobody in the country around in the north that can understands them. There was Gates and Paul Allen. He's the other partner with Gates, and the guy that's the president, the CEO of Apple. And so I planned and built him a computer lab. I did a lot of homework. I had actually built one before, but it wasn't that high pressure lab.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned a lot about it.
So it was to create the insides of the computers.
It was to create a classroom that they could learn from, you know. Like one thing, I knew that computers are very sensitive in those days to temperature.
So was it for them to use the computers or for them to create?
It was to
computers?
create.
That's right.
That's where they learned how to do the big thing.
That's
What the
amazing.
hell's the name of their
Microsoft.
Microsoft, yeah. And they were just nerds. The only one that wasn't a nerd was sort of Paul Allen. He looked like a normal guy, but they were all really bright. And they're all in this one school. It's partly because every rich family and knowledgeable, educated sent their kids there. Even if they were Catholics, they sent them there because they wouldn't allow more than 15 students in a class. That's the secret to the whole damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't allow them to hide from an education. I
What
remember when
school? What was the name of it?
Lakeside School. My 2 granddaughters went to the elementary part for a number of years. And then, because the money was so expensive, grade school tuition was $25,000. And Heidi wasn't willing to pay $50,000. So she switched them to the best Catholic school in town, Seattle Prep. And then I was their consultant.
Our decorations came off. Look at our decorations on the fireplace.
Oh, yes, they are so pretty. I'd like to see you teach your brother how to roll.
Oh, my phone.
I know. You shouldn't do that.